Welcome everyone to the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We had a new playoff iteration come out recently, a 14-team playoff, and it feels like we're going to keep seeing more iterations come out as the time goes on. And then we will get into some comments from the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, about the possible employment status of athletes going forward. Then we'll get into some NFL Combine talk. The defensive linemen and linebackers worked out yesterday, so we'll touch on that to end the show. And we'll continue on with our Combine Watch List series, and we'll do quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers to watch this week. We will miss out on talking about O-linemen and place kickers, but tons of really cool guys to watch there, so definitely be on the lookout for them. I believe their workout day is Saturday and Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. But before we start, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and things throughout the show, and the best way for y'all to get your questions read on the show and seen on the show as quickly as possible is to use the link at the bottom of the screen there, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions here on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net for any questions that you might have. But let's jump right in because it has been a crazy couple of weeks in college football. The playoff has been taking a lot of the headlines as of recently. It went from a 12-team playoff with a 6+6 format with 6 auto bids and 6 at large to a 12-team with 5+7, 5 at auto bids, 7 at large. And that seems to be what we're working with for 2024 and 2025. But there were question marks after that, right? And it seems like one of the new floated out ideas is a 14-team playoff, which is a weird number to me, but I'll get into that a little bit more later. The 14-team playoff would consist of 3 auto bids from the SEC and Big Ten, which is down 1 from the 4 that they claim that there were rumors that they wanted for the 12 team. So a little bit of a compromise there. You would get 2 for the ACC and the Big 12. You would get 1 for the Group of 5, and then you would have 3 at-large bids unless Notre Dame was in the top 10. Then they would be automatically in, and you would only have 2 at-large bids. Obviously, this creates a lot of questions, which I will get into throughout this. But one of the wrinkles of this is it seems the SEC and the Big Ten are pushing and might be in line to have the 2 buys for their conference champions. And that was one of the big questions following this decision is where does that leave conference championship week? Well, at least in those 2 conferences, it keeps that fight alive to want that first round bye, if you do want that first round bye. But it does, give a little bit more power to the SEC and the Big Ten, and probably is one of the big reasons that they were willing to go down from 4 to 3 auto bids in this new iteration. This is yet another example that the College Football Playoff Committee and the group running it and setting it up is very amenable to whatever, essentially. It seems like they have no problem changing on the fly. They have no problem dealing with, shifts in the landscape of college football. And as we know, that's been happening over the last couple of years, and I expect it to happen again. And I do have that big question of this will go into effect in 2026, which is 2 years away now. We'll have 2 full college football seasons, and we have Florida State and the ACC fighting it out. It looks like Florida State is starting to find their way into finding a way out of that conference, and they're not going to be alone in doing that depending on what the settlement looks like between those 2 parties. But the reality is there are so many teams that will probably end up following Florida State after they make their decision inevitably. So there is this question from my end, and I think from a lot of people's end, where sure, this works for now. When we look at the landscape for now, you want the Big 12, you want the ACC, you want the Group of 5, you want all of them included. But in 2 years, we could have, Florida State, North Carolina, Miami, and Clemson in the SEC, and you could have Virginia and Georgia Tech and all these other teams in the Big Ten. basically you could have an ACC that looks nothing like it does today and wouldn't even be on the same level as the Big 12 is right now. So mm, I I'm very skeptical if this is going to be the model that we go into 2026 with, but this is the newest model that they've floated out there. And for my money, if I, could set it up the way I would like, it would be, first of all, I would go back to having five power conferences, make everyone go back to the Pac 12, but that's beside the point. Now that we're down this road, I think I'm really hoping the ACC stays a viable conference. I'm really hoping that Florida State stays in that conference and everyone else can, we can figure out a better media deal or whatever is, holding everything up there, and hope that all of that stays intact. And if that's the case, I really do kind of like this format. I mean, I understand I don't necessarily love the 14 teams. I think if you're going to do a playoff in a sport that is so spread out and has such a remarkable talent disparity and ability disparity between teams, I think 4, 8, or 16 should be your jumping off points, but they've seemed to enjoy the idea of buys for certain teams. So, while I disagree, this seems to be the newest thing that they're kind of moving forward with, and at the very least, this keeps everyone involved, right? There was a lot of worry that the SEC and the Big Ten were going to kind of monopolize this thing, and I still tend to have my worries about that. But at the very least, this keeps every single conference in the game. It gives a group of 5 team a shot. It gives teams like Notre Dame a shot to get in, although I think this does push Notre Dame even further into possibly joining a conference, but we'll see what happens there. I think it keeps the ACC involved. It keeps the Big 12 involved. It keeps some of what college football is about involved in this process. And I think in the grand scheme of things, that's a great idea, right? You'd love for all of this to go off without a hitch. You'd love for a great, setup. You'd love for everything to work out perfectly. I just tend to think there's going to be so many things changing over the next even 6 months here that will affect this decision making and possibly will affect the 14-team playoff ever happening. And going back to the buys that I was talking about, I've never really understood buys in the college football playoff. It doesn't really much make sense to me. While I get that there are certain teams that might be a little bit above the others, and obviously the Big Ten and SEC champion would be some of the best teams in the country at the end of the year. There's no two ways about that. But the way I look at it is I don't think there's ever going to be a right amount of buys. Whether it's 2 teams or 4 teams or 6 teams, I don't think there's ever going to be a cutoff where the 3rd team that doesn't get a bye, or the 5th team, or the 7th team, whatever team is right on the outside looking in, there will always be arguments for them being over the other 2 or the other 4 or the other 6. So it creates even more trouble for the playoff committee and for this idea in general than there really needs to be. Because if you have a 16-team playoff, let's say, and you have Georgia all the way up at the top, and your number 16 team, more than likely, it'll depend on the season and depend on the team, but more than likely will be the group of 5 team that finds their way in by winning their conference. And that's a game that I'm sure Georgia wouldn't mind playing to open their playoff. It's a nice game to get into things. And also, these kids, we've seen how bye weeks affect college football teams throughout the season. A lot of teams come back from bye weeks and they just look slower. They look a little bit less disciplined, whatever it is. I don't know if they want that to happen in the most important game of the season for them. So I don't think anyone would shy away from having a bye, because it is an absolute grind of a season, and there's definitely some health factors that you'd like to get right. But at the end of the day, I just don't think there's ever going to be a right number of buys where everyone's like, okay, that totally makes sense, let's move forward, and everyone will be hunky-dory at the end of the day. So I tend to believe we should just jump to 16. I think 16 it's the number they do in the FCS. It's a number that makes sense pretty much across the board. You can pretty much include everyone, even in a model where the Big Ten and the SEC have all the power. Even if Florida State and Clemson and Miami and North Carolina and Virginia, all the big ACC brands, if they find other places to play, that's fine. If you have enough teams in this playoff to go around, right? If you have enough room in this playoff to go around. So I think if you set yourself at 16 now, you can adjust with the times without having to adjust that number, which is the biggest problem I've had with this entire process has been we started at 4 and then people started talking about 6, which is what I kind of liked at the time, and then there were talks about 8, and then they jumped straight to 12, and everyone was a little confused, and now it's possibly jumping to 14. And I get that you want to create a, NFL model type playoff with buys and with teams, fighting till the very end to get that last bye. But at the end of the day, the seeding should do enough, right? If you're using a good model and you're using strength of schedule and, different metrics to actually evaluate these teams correctly, the 1 in 16, it shouldn't be a problem that they didn't get a bye, because they should be able to play a team that is the worst of the 16 teams, right? So I think that it opens a lot of different questions, right? Is this going to be the final iteration until 2026? I tend to think no. I think at some point they'll jump up to 16, or at some point it gets a lot sketchier, which I'll get into here in a second. But for the 16-team model, I've always been a proponent of the more teams that you have in, as long as you have some automatic qualifiers. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of auto bids in general, but I understand, wanting to get the group of 5 involved no matter what, wanting to get the ACC and the Big 12 involved no matter what. So that's all well and good. But I think once you get to the at-large bids, I don't see a value in having a committee in a room deciding who's better than the other. I don't really see the value in not having the model that they had, back in the day when maybe some of you weren't really watching college football, but the BCS model, it wasn't perfect because there were only 2 teams at the end of the day. So the margins between those teams were going to be very, very slim. But when you apply it to at-large bids around the country, especially in a model where the SEC and the Big Ten play tougher schedules, they go through more of a grind, they probably play higher level football at the end of the day, there needs to be some type of computer-based algorithm to figure out who actually is the team that deserves, is the best team, whatever you want to call it. There has to be an unbiased, fully unbiased, because I understand that the people in the college football playoff are meant to be unbiased, and for the most part, I think they do a fine job. But at the end of the day, it's hard to keep that out of it, right? So I think it to me, any at-large bid that would be had in a 16-team or a 14-team playoff shouldn't be left up to a group of people, because then you'll probably end up deciding for 3 at-large bids, let's say, in this 14-team playoff, there's probably about 7 teams that would have an argument at the end of the day, and that's just a nightmare to figure out. So I tend to think that the best way to do this is have 16 teams, have some auto bids if you'd like, with the group of 5 and with the ACC and with the Big 12, and then use a BCS model, use a more modern, obviously, but use some type of algorithm to figure out who are the next 3 or 4 or 7 or however many auto or at-large bids. Figure out who those 7 best teams are, because that's what's going to get you the best product at the end of the day. So a lot of different things going on here. I think going back to my idea that this will not be the final iteration to by 2026, I think there's a real reality where we have multiple postseason tournaments going on all at the same time. I talked about Florida State leaving the ACC and the ACC possibly becoming a totally different conference than what we know it to be today, and the Big Ten and the SEC only bolstering their groupings. But at that point, if you are at a point where, say, both conferences have 20 teams and they're among the, top 50 teams in the country for the most part. And I mean, when you look at the athletic departments making the most actually making money off their sports programs, it's almost entirely SEC and Big Ten teams, and the teams that aren't SEC or Big Ten teams are ACC teams that would be one of the first few out the door if this were to pass. So there's tons of things that are going to be moving around this, and I wonder if when they come to the table in 2025, if the SEC is coming off a great year and they've if they're set up to add Florida State and Clemson and Miami and Virginia, just for example, the following year, they have no reason necessarily from their point of view to keep the Big 12 and the ACC involved. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish they would, have the motivation of just keeping the sport what the sport is. But at the end of the day, you got to look out for your conference. And I think when the Big Ten and the SEC get this new influx of teams, which I think is kind of an inevitability at this point, I think they're going to see the power dynamic become even bigger, their power in that room become even bigger, and then they might just take their playoff and walk away from the rest of the group. They might just have a playoff that works within their conference championship schedule. I heard Josh Pate talking about this earlier this week, where essentially it's an 8-team playoff, but you have 4 teams from the SEC, 4 teams from the Big Ten. It looks a lot like the AFC and NFC, but the game before the championship, so the semifinal of the playoff, technically, would be the SEC and the Big Ten championship. That would keep the energy in the championship weekend, which is something I'm very worried about in the future of this. And then it would also just create a playoff with the best teams in the country, among the best conferences. But then the question is, where does that leave everyone else? And that's obviously a huge worry. That's not something that any college football fan wants, but the Big 12 and the ACC could have the same thing, and then the Group of 5 could have something. It's just the way I see things going is there's going to be such a tiering of college football that becomes so distinct and so clear to pretty much everyone that watches that it's going to be really hard for the SEC and the Big Ten to come to that table and say, yeah, we'll throw them a couple of auto bids. We'll give them, a place in the party without any, without them being on the same level in terms of football ability that we are. I think when you come to the table in 2025, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have plenty to say. And I think it's going to be more and more demands of why are these other people involved in a playoff if you claim you want the best teams in the playoff. And I wish I could disagree with that argument because it's not what I want to happen. I wish we could flip everything back a couple of years and have honestly, a 6-team playoff. We could go back to the BCS format for all I care. I just want regular season college football to mean as much as it's always meant. I want all of the energy around conference championship week. I want all of the energy around bowl season, but that seems to be gone. And I think we need to try to salvage this as best we can, and hopefully the SEC and the Big Ten understand that the fans want everyone to be part of the same postseason. But I worry that that's not going to be the case. But tons to be answered here, tons still to be talked about. I'm not sure that this will be the last time that we hear a new iteration of the playoff. In fact, I'm sure this will not be the last time, even in the next 6 months, that we hear about a new iteration. But tons to think about, tons to look forward to, I guess. But we're going to take a short break here. And then when we get back, the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, had some very interesting comments about what employment would do to the college football landscape. So we will get into all of that right after this break.
feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the new playoff format that has been thrown out there. A 14-team playoff with a lot of moving parts that I am skeptical will come into fruition, but we'll see what happens there. But now, let's talk about the NCAA president's comments. Charlie Baker had an interesting article that came out where he was talking about possible employment for student athletes. This has become a huge topic of conversation. I think we talked about it earlier this week. When talking about the decision between the NCAA and Tennessee, and the NCAA essentially being denied any ability to enforce a lot of their NIL rules. And obviously, this is in direct correlation to that. He had to jump to because a lot of things were happening around him, and the NCAA obviously wanted to be a part of it. So it's very interesting concept. He said he claims that 95% of student athletes would face extinction if contracts became a thing in college sports. This might be true. I'm not I'm no expert on what goes on in all of this type of stuff, but I do think this is kind of a one-dimensional look at things, and not to say there wouldn't be hurdles to get over, and we will get into those hurdles, and there's tons. I won't lie about that, but college sports are one of the few areas in sports in general where we have different sports. We have totally different athletes and totally different needs and all of these different things, but they're treated roughly the same, right? College football is kind of governed the same way as like women's volleyball, but they're two totally different products. They're two totally different games. They're two totally different, ball games in totality. So there is this, I think there's this thought that all of these contracts that are going to be put into place, because I tend to think that's where we're heading, whether, people like it or not, I tend to believe that's really the only way that we're going to be able to have some semblance of understanding around what's going on in college sports. I think it creates like this idea that all of these contracts will be structured the same, will be looked at the same, and I just don't think that's the case. And while there's definitely worries about, the smaller non-revenue sports, especially if what's been talked about for a long time, like college football breaking off and becoming its own specific thing, comes to fruition, it leaves a lot of people in tough spots. I mean, only 30 athletic departments in the country turn a profit, and most of them are in the Big Ten and the SEC, and so the vast majority of athletic departments cannot do contracts for their kids, and I think that's probably true in terms of what the normal contract will look like in the SEC and the Big Ten, but these are not going to be the same thing across the board. We talked about it in the last segment. This is a very tiered sport in college football. It's a very tiered system in college sports, so there needs to be at least some type of adjustments that can be made down the line. If you're going from football to basketball to volleyball to softball, it doesn't matter. I think there needs to be some type of different contracts being handed out, and there needs to be some type of different employment strategies, whether that's you're a full-time employee, like say Quinn Ewers at Texas, starting quarterback for Texas, likely going to the NFL after this upcoming season. He would likely be a full-time employee. He probably wouldn't have to worry about class unless he really wanted to, and that would create an interesting dynamic in college sports, but I think that's where we're heading. And then, but if you're talking about, a really good player on the Oklahoma softball team, I think a lot of that could be based off, NIL and incentives and different things that could bring in money to the athletic department, could bring in money to that team, could do different things that would make it viable. So obviously, this is going to be an imperfect system. I think there's very little reality where we are able to implement contracts perfectly and smoothly and it not become a problem somewhere down the road, whether that's a kid getting taken advantage of in their contract disputes, whether that's some sports just not getting nearly as much as the other sports. But I think it's something that has to happen because at least it'll be a system. It's going to be imperfect. It's going to be a little bit ugly at times, but it's something we can all point at and say, we know the rules of this. We fully understand what is being done here, and we know what the exact parameters are. And it's a very, very complex issue that, frankly, I've been very confused by for quite some time because there's a lot of stuff going on around it. Baker in December proposed a new tier for Division I, which is kind of what we talked about in the last segment, where it has to be some type of different setup depending on where you are in the pecking order of college sports. But he did say he's there is a lot of hope from him that Congress will have to get involved if this wants to come to pass. And I'll say this as straightforward as I possibly can: Congress is not going to get involved, at least not in the time frame that he needs them to get involved. Because let's be honest, after the Tennessee ruling, the NCAA is in a really tough spot. They are starting to kind of crumble before our eyes. It's something that people have been talking about for a while, and this might be the moment that kind of starts it tumbling down a hill. But I tend to believe this is kind of on them. And I hate to, throw all the blame on one entity, because obviously there's a ton of people working at this and a ton of people that have created the circumstances we're under now. But at the end of the day, when you look back at particularly the compensation history of college football, for a very long time, there have been people pushing for these college athletes to get paid. There were a number of people like Reggie Bush or Terrell Pryor, or pick a name, that had gotten in trouble for selling or for doing things that were against the rules at that time that now aren't. And basically, the NCAA has been, at least 2 or 3 years behind every single one of the steps forward in employment strategy for college athletes, whether it was back in the day being way behind on the Reggie Bush deal, even earlier being way behind on NIL to where the states had to take over and force their hand, being way late on setting up guidelines for the NIL, so now they're violating antitrust laws by enforcing them. And now they're late to the employment party because I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's the unionization effort, at Dartmouth to make themselves employees, all the athletes there, which is a push that is going to happen across the country. If Dartmouth wins this, and there seem to be a lot of people that think Dartmouth has a very good shot of winning it, it's going to be a flash flood. The same way that when Florida or maybe California, one of those two was the first to pull the trigger on the NIL deals, everyone followed suit. So the thing that the NCAA has not done well for themselves is keep up with the times. They've sat for a really, really long time saying, you know, it's a lot of a lot of red tape to get through, and do we really believe that these kids should be paid at that high of a level, and NIL will create all these problems and all these different things that they would tell us. But at the end of the day, all of this stuff could have been figured out. I have no doubts about that. I think all of this stuff was on the table to be figured out if they were 2 years earlier to the party. So the NCAA has kind of created a lot of the problems for themselves and are now trying to play catch up, and it's just not going to work. So I think there is a lot of worry, obviously, with this, because when you look at contracts across college sports, they're going to be different. They're going to have to be different, or you're going to see a lot of non-revenue sports, whether it's women's softball or volleyball or even baseball in some scenarios, turn into club sports, which is obviously not what any of us want. So I think while the contract idea is a new one and it's a very interesting way to go about business, especially in the college ranks where we haven't had to deal with that for the majority of the time, I think it's something that's going to have to happen. I think period, end of story. It's something that you have to put a structure on what's going on in college athletics. You have to put a structure on all of the different things that are going on around NIL and going on around just money in the sport. You have to put all of this on paper. You have to make sure that all of the parameters are very clear. And right now it's the Wild West. So although it might not be the best step forward, although it might not be totally ideal for the future of the sport, I think it's something that's going to happen. It's something that probably needs to happen, and it's something that the NCAA probably could have been involved in if they were 2 years earlier, 3 years earlier, and just kind of opened their eyes to see what all of the athletes and the coaches and everyone was talking about across the sport. So I'm having a hard time feeling a lot of sympathy for the NCAA here. I do think they will be a part of this somehow, but I think they're going to get cut out of a lot of the bigger sports, especially college football, because college football is totally different than every single other sport in college sports. There's no two ways about that. It brings in the most money. It has the most fans. The kids are the most famous. All of these different things. It's going to be different, and it needs to be dealt with differently. And it could have been if the NCAA would just, look around, see what's happening around them, and adjust accordingly. But they were late, and it's created a lot of problems for them. It's created a lot of problems for some athletes in the NCAA, and we'll see what happens with this employment status. We'll see what happens with contracts, but there is definitely some worry across a lot of college sports that people being a little bit late to the party on, compensating college athletes accordingly have created a lot of problems for them. So ton to still happen here, obviously, ton to unpack, and we'll get more concrete details on what all this means going forward. But I have a hard time believing we're not heading towards an employee type setup in college sports. I would be very surprised if that was not the future, and whatever form that takes, it'll be very interesting to see the domino effect of that. But we'll take a little break here, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about some quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. They have reported to Indy the last couple of days. We'll go through workouts this weekend, so we'll break down a couple of guys to watch that are maybe a little bit under the radar. But definitely stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, making some comments about the possible employment status of athletes across the country and the effects of that. And now it's time to get back into the Combine watch list. We have the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers reporting today, and there are tons of guys to watch. I know the quarterback position has been a little bit tempered the expectations with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May deciding to not go through workouts. It actually looks like Caleb Williams will not do medical tests, which is a very interesting development and could lead to Jaden Daniels and Drake May possibly moving even a little bit more up those boards than some people thought. But still tons of guys to watch, and let's jump in with the quarterbacks to start. I think this guy has the most to gain from this week. It's J.J. McCarthy from Michigan, a quarterback that a lot of people have opinions on. I don't think there's anyone that is quite neutral on this kid. I might be somewhere towards the middle, but I think there are a lot of opinions flying around about him. I think more and more guys at the NFL ranks have started to like what they've seen from him, and I fully understand that. He is a guy that has a ton of different tools that you have to love as an NFL scout. Super athletic, can make a ton of plays with his legs when you need him to, can make tons of throws. He just wasn't asked to very often at Michigan, and obviously has played a ton of football, is very smart, can read defenses very well. The big worry for me with JJ is he hasn't really been asked to go out and win a game for his team, at least when he was at Michigan. There were not many times where he had to be almost perfect for them to win a game, and the reality of the NFL is you're probably going to have to be very, very good most days regardless of whatever happens around you for your team to win any given day. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he handles all that pressure. He could literally go anywhere. I could see him going high in the first round if someone like the Falcons want to pick a quarterback and those top three guys are off the list. He could go in the second round. So there are tons of positions that he could fall into, and I think this week will do a lot for him to decide which one of those directions he's going to go in. But another quarterback that is very interesting to me is Spencer Rattler, quarterback from South Carolina. Didn't have the greatest year last year, but one of the more gifted throwers in the entire draft from my eyes. The dude, the ball explodes out of his hand, can make a ton of different throws, has, the ability to run, throw on the run, and create a ton of incredible plays just off platform, off balance. So I think his ceiling is really, really high. I think he has a chance to really show something in those, throwing workouts that they will go through. Him and Michael Penix are two guys that I would absolutely watch because two very gifted throwers of the football, and they might be the guys that are kind of fighting for some spots here because the 4 through 8 is a very interesting area for these quarterbacks. I believe right now the 4 is probably J.J. McCarthy if you ask the majority of people, and then you have Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and Spencer Rattler. I think Spencer Rattler has a chance to jump over Penix and Bo Nix depending on how he performs this week, because this is a guy that was running for his life a year ago because his O-line was just not very good, and he needed to make plays for himself, and I think teams will take that into account, and if he can show that he has the physical ability, I think there's a team out there that would definitely talk themselves into him. So it'll be interesting to see how all of these players jockey for position, especially with the top 3 guys not going through workouts. Ton to gain from these lower level quarterbacks, even guys out of the top 10 that have a chance to make some noise if they can really show out this week. But let's move on to their backfield counterparts, the running backs. Florida State running back Trey Benson is a very interesting prospect in this draft. He is, I believe, running back 3 according to NFL Network, but with Jonathan Brooks sitting out workouts because of his ACL tear, him and Jalen Wright are pretty much the guys to watch this week. They are going to command a lot of attention around a lot of scouts and will be pretty much must-see TV throughout their process because both those guys can fly. Trey Benson can do a number of things really well, but I think one of the things you notice with him pretty much off the bat is his feel for running behind the line of scrimmage is pretty incredible. And that sounds weird, but the ability for a back to be very patient and feel out where the gap is going to be, and then right when it opens, just hit it as hard as you can and get gone as fast as possible, is something that the best running backs do incredibly well. You see Christian McCaffrey sit and do a couple of jump steps and then just hit a hole incredibly fast. You see guys like Bijan Robinson do this incredibly well on tosses and things of that nature. So it's a wildly valuable trait that a lot of people are looking for in running backs, especially guys like him that can run in between the tackles, and he's someone that can really show that off. It might not be this week. I think there's a lot of game tape out there on these guys already that they like, but he can back up a lot of what they're saying this week and at least shoot up the boards. And so far, the Florida State guys have been having quite the days, so we'll get into that in the next segment. But another running back that a little bit different than Trey Benson and physical ability, but I apologize. Ray Davis, the running back from Kentucky, this dude has just played so much high-level football. He has 2 back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, both in the SEC, although for different schools. He was at Vandy 1 year and then Kentucky a year ago. He's a very strong runner, can do a number of things, can run in between or outside the tackles, is an underrated pass catcher, honestly, can do a ton of things out of the backfield that teams will like. And I think he's someone that's going to be a great interview. He's an absolute fighter. If you go through his story leading up to college, you will see that this dude does not back down from any challenge. And he is going to definitely have some interviews where teams will walk out of the room and say, that dude is an absolute adult, carries himself so responsibly and so comfortably that he might just get a flyer in the late round, and then people will be looking at it 5 years from now or even 2 years from now saying, how did he go that low? But another guy that might just befall that same fate is Ladd McConkey, the wide receiver from Georgia. It seems like people are starting to come around on this kid. There will be a lot of people that will tell you, especially on Twitter, where there are a lot of people that talk a lot but don't necessarily think a lot, but they will tell you that he is a slot receiver. They will tell you he's Hunter Renfrow or Cooper Kupp or insert white slot receiver here, but that's not even remotely true. This dude is as complete of a receiver as there is really in this draft. I mean, there's the 3 guys up top are really, really hard to touch, I won't lie, but his stop and go is honestly better than any other wide receiver in this draft. His ability to create separation on things like out routes and curls and all of these different things is pretty much second to none. It's really remarkable to watch, and it's partly because he's a smaller frame. He can get lower to the ground. Those turns can be a little bit quicker. And also, he runs a full route tree. It's not just slants. It's not just outs. It's not just curls. He can run goes. He can run post fades. He can do a ton of different things that a lot of people won't, or technically right now don't think he can do. And I think this week is going to be huge for him. I think he's going to go through all of these drills and is going to go flying colors. I don't necessarily see him dropping a ball. He had one of the best hands in the entire country and does have, honestly, maybe the best hands in this entire draft, barring Marvin Harrison Jr., who's an absolute freak. But this is a dude that a lot of people will overlook because of the physical stature, because of other, because of worry that he is going to get injured or whatever. Don't. Don't let your team be the team that does this, because whatever team he goes to, he's going to have an immediate impact. I feel very, very confident about that. And it's not necessarily just because I think he's going to be an outright great receiver from the second he gets on a team, but you can use him in infinite number of ways. You can put him in the backfield, you can use him on jet sweeps, you can use him in the kick return game or the punt return game. You can do so many different things that get him on the field and at least get the ball in his hands, because once you get the ball in his hands, you'll realize that this kid can do a number of things that a kid that is his size and his prerequisite athletic ability probably shouldn't be able to do. But I'm very excited to see what he can do this week, because I think he could make a ton of money. And then a little bit off the radar guy that I absolutely love is Javon Baker. This dude is super tough. He has incredibly strong hands, so if you're at the point of attack with him, you're probably not going to win. I'll be totally honest. Super physically gifted. Is more of kind of like an outside threat fade type guy, but I think he'll probably go towards the later rounds, but could definitely shoot up in this combine period, because he's super talented and he really does jump off the page, especially when going on one-on-ones, because you see he can make a catch in literally any coverage. So definitely someone to watch there, someone I really like a lot, and might fall a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 years he was a consistent part of a rotation for a team. But tons of guys I didn't even get a chance to get to. So many great wide receivers to watch. A thinner group at running back than usual, but still tons of guys to watch there. And then the quarterbacks, obviously you have the 3 guys sitting out the workouts, but the guys below them are the ones that have the most to gain, right? So I'd love to see them show what they're about, and see if, JJ or Michael Penix or Bo Nix can jump into that conversation and be that number 4 quarterback. And then who knows where you go, right? So still tons to figure out there, tons to look forward to this weekend with these athletes. But that's all for that segment. We are going to take a short break here, our final break actually, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the D linemen and linebackers that worked out yesterday. Some absolutely eye-popping numbers from some guys, so we're going to do a quick rundown of all of those different numbers and some guys that might have made themselves quite a bit of money yesterday. So stick with us and we will be right back. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers to watch throughout this week at the Combine. And now it's time to talk about some takeaways from the Combine. We had some people working out. The D linemen and linebackers went through their on-field workouts yesterday. The 40-yard dash, vertical jump, broad jump. We had 3-cone drills. We had tons of different stuff to pull from, and tons of cool numbers. But before I jump into this, I do want to remind everyone that this is just the NFL Combine. These are just numbers. A lot of the decisions that people have on these kids has been decided because they've seen tons of tape and they've seen tons of what they need to see. But it's always fun to look at some really incredible numbers, and man, we had a ton. Let's start with the guy that might have made the most money of anyone yesterday, and Braden Fisk from Florida State, defensive tackle that was a huge part of their season, was super disruptive in that ACC championship game where they absolutely needed him. He ran a 4.78 40, a 10-yard split of 1.68, so just incredible get off, remarkable speed. He had the top vert as well for defensive tackles. He's just remarkably explosive, remarkably fast. Seeing him go through workouts, he was getting around bags so much faster, so his ability to get low to the ground is pretty remarkable, and he's someone that could play some type of defensive tackle, defensive end hybrid role because, man, that dude is athletic. Another guy that absolutely showed out is Rook Ororo. I apologize if I got that wrong. I believe I got it right, but it was on full display because his athletic ability is off the charts. He was in the top 5, I think, in pretty much everything. He was a 4.9 40-yard dash, and when you're that big, that is incredibly fast. He was 4th in that 40 times, 2nd in the 10-yard split, which is huge for defensive tackles and defensive linemen overall. 3rd in vert and 2nd in broad jump. So the dude was just an athletic freak all day, and there have been a ton of guys that were athletic freaks all day. Another guy that everyone was talking about was Tavondre Sweat, the defensive tackle out of Texas. And a big question mark coming into this was, what was he going to weigh in at? He did not weigh during the Senior Bowl, but he came in at 366. He played last season at Texas at 365. So teams had to feel really, really good about that. Had to feel like, at least he's sticking at that weight, because if you watched him last year, he can play at that weight. That's no problem for him. But his 40 time is a 5.27. And that sounds like not that interesting of a number, but at 366 pounds, it's a very interesting number. I can't believe that someone that big can move that fast. In fact, there was another defensive tackle, I believe Dominic McKinley from Texas A&M, is around 320 and ran roughly the same time. So just to give you an idea of how incredibly fast he was moving, Tavondre Sweat is just an absolute athletic freak. He did everything that he had to do yesterday to keep his position, which is likely somewhere mid to late second round for the most part. And then the guy that everyone's talking about with defensive tackles is Byron Murphy. This guy got praise all over the NFL world yesterday. I saw Matt Miller had him, I believe, going into this process as 13th in his big board, so all of the prospects ranked, and he thought that might be too low after what he showed yesterday. The dude he did everything remarkably well. I think he ran a 4.88 40, was in the top 5, and vertical jump was in the top 5, and pretty much everything. So this dude did everything you wanted him to do, and then in the on-field workouts, the 4-bag drill, the 3-cone, all of that type of stuff, his ability to turn and get low to the ground is pretty remarkable. Even Cam Jordan was on the broadcast and gave him praise when he was going through that 4-bag workout, because the dude is just an athletic freak. So I think he did everything that you could have asked him. I think he is locked in as the top defensive tackle in this draft, and wherever he goes, I think they're going to be very, very happy. And then one guy that I talked about a little bit leading up to this was Mason Smith. He showed his athletic ability. There's no two ways about that. He showed that he has a super high ceiling, and if given the right situation to develop, he could be a game wrecker, honestly. I thought he could have gone back to LSU for one more year and possibly even been a first-round pick this upcoming year. But at the end of the day, I think he will get drafted probably on the second day sometime, and I think as long as he's in a position to get developed by a really good coach, I think he could be an absolute game wrecker. So very excited to see what he can do. And then defensive ends have just so many guys. I can't even, it's just insane how many dudes. Let's start with some guys that jumped off the page that you might have not expected. Mekhi Wingo from LSU, Dwayne Carter from Duke, and then we talked about it earlier this week, Darius Robinson from Missouri, all had incredible RAS scores, which is raw athletic score. So all of these guys were just showing off what they're capable of, showing off their high ceiling, and showing off their remarkable ability. So all those guys, I think, did wonders for themselves, at least to help them, move up a couple of spots here and there throughout the draft period. And then you get into the big boys of this edge class, and that is Chop Robinson, Jared Verse, Liatu Latu, and Dallas Turner. Those guys are the ones setting the pace. More Verse, Latu, and Turner, but Chop Robinson did a ton yesterday. Ran a 4.48, which was one of the fastest. I shouldn't say the fastest because Dallas Turner beat him, but one of the fastest of the edge rushers. And that's honestly going to be faster than some running backs and wide receivers. So just an absolute freak of nature, can do so many different things. And I think much like a guy like Mason Smith, obviously Chop Robinson has a little bit more under his belt than Mason Smith does, but I think if you put him in the right situation and let him develop into who he can be, man, this guy could resemble another Penn State grad that is tearing up the league in Michael Parsons right now. So very excited to see what he can do. Jared Verse, his numbers this year were eerily similar to Will Anderson's a year ago. 4.6 40-yard dash, literally exactly the same. They're roughly the same size, very similar. And I think it could be that Jared Verse has the same fate as Will Anderson a year ago, where he ends up being defensive end number one, because that's kind of where I have him at this moment. But another guy that's right up there is Liatu Latu. Didn't necessarily have the best measurables day in the grand scheme of things, but as we talked about at the beginning, the measurables can only mean so much. There is so much good tape on this kid, but on the on-field drills, he really showed out, and that's kind of what is the big deal, right? I mean, you got to show your on-field ability, and he was able to do that. And if you watch tape on this kid, it's obvious he is one of, if not the best edge rusher in this class. And then let's talk about the athletic freak of the group in Dallas Turner. My Lord, this kid is off the charts in most of this stuff. He had 40.5-inch vert, which is better than some NBA players, and I'm not even lying. He had a 4.47 40, which is stupid. He basically did every athletic thing that you can think of. He was right there at the top for all of them. He genuinely might be the most athletic guy in the entire draft, regardless of position. So tons to really like with him. And then let's get into some guys that you might not have heard the names of, but really showed out yesterday and showed what their ability is about. Muhammad Kamara is a fantastic edge rusher, I believe from Colorado State. I could be mistaken there, but most likely a later round pick, but he really showed his athletic ability. Adisa Isaac from Penn State is another guy that did that as well. Cedric Johnson from Ole Miss was remarkable in most of the measurables throughout the day. Javonte Jean-Baptiste from Notre Dame and previously Ohio State was very impressive with the on-field workouts yesterday. Both may be under the radar, but gives you an idea of how freaky this edge class is. And then three guys totally off the beaten path are Eric Watts from Connecticut, Miles Cole from Texas Tech, and then Jalix Hunt from Houston Christian. All put up really, really good numbers. So I think all of those guys, at the very least, put themselves on the radar of some of these teams. And Miles Cole, I believe, is going to be drafted almost no matter what because he's high enough on the list. But guys like Eric Watts and Jalix Hunt have to feel great about what they were able to show at the Combine yesterday. But this D-line class is just insane. I can't remember a D-line class that was quite as great as this one. And there's so many different body types, play styles. Literally every team in the NFL should want some of these guys, if not multiple of these guys, because, man, can they go. And then let's get to linebackers. And the guy that really set the pace at the 40-yard dash was Peyton Wilson. He ran a 4.44. just insane athletic ability from that guy. The worry, obviously, is his injury history, but his ability is obvious. I don't think that's at all a worry. The worry is obviously availability. So there will be, it'll be interesting to see what happened during his physicals and his medical tests. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for a kid that can play football, Peyton Wilson is right up there with the best of them. Edrin Cooper, another guy, he showed why he might be the best linebacker in the entire draft, was towards the top of pretty much every single metric. Another guy that I talked about earlier in the week that was towards the top was Trevin Wallace. Showed off his remarkable athletic ability that I had talked about. Dude can absolutely fly and do a number of things really, really well. So he was someone that I think definitely moved up a couple of draft boards yesterday. Kalen DeLoach showed up big, another Florida State guy that had a great day. We're in a 4.47 on the 40, which is just incredible. Could be kind of a hybrid linebacker, edge rusher type guy, so it'll be interesting to see how teams use him. But Florida State had a great day between Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, and Kalen DeLoach. They had quite the day between for their defensive guys. And then a couple other guys that had great days is Edifuan Ulafosio. I did my best. I apologize if I butchered that. But he had a very, very good day, a very productive guy in college coming out of Washington, and he definitely turned some heads. He did some things that were really remarkable on the field, and I think there are a lot of people that are looking at him in slightly different light today than they were a day ago. And then a guy a little bit off the beaten path was Jordan McGee. He showed up just everywhere, across every single metric. I think he was in the top 5. He's coming from Temple. I think he was going to be, probably a third-day draft pick, and he probably still will be, but there's a big difference between getting that call early in the day when it's the 4th round and then as opposed to waiting until the 6th or 7th to get that call. So I think he definitely moved up the board and helped his draft status a ton yesterday. So tons of guys to watch for. This is a remarkable defensive line class, a really, really solid linebacker class with tons of very fun guys to watch and tons of guys that a little bit off the beaten path that have made a ton of money. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference for us. Also, we invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or X, TikTok, Instagram for all of the content, all of the updates across all sports, not just college football. So if you're an NBA fan, if you're an NFL fan, if you're an MLB fan, whatever it is, we have it covered on our channel. So definitely subscribe there to see all of the updates across the sporting world. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you Monday.
Let's go.